Okay. I would like the committees to call their, the chairpersons to call their committees into session. I will start off and call the regional into session.
I'll call Southborough and Superintendent's Union number 3.
And I will call Northborough into session.
Okay. So we are going to, I just want to go over briefly the process. So each of the school committee members, you have a list of questions in front of you, and we will just each ask a question to go around the table, starting with Kelly. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Paul Desmond for yeoman's job he has done in pretty much putting together this whole process of, he was our contact person with MASC, and worked with them in scheduling all the focus groups, the questionnaire. He was the contact person who got all the results, distributed it to everyone, and he was the one who put the initial pass of questions together, which that's a big yeoman's job, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. So I thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so, having said that, Paul, you will introduce our internal candidate.
I'm happy to. Greg Martineau came to us as Assistant Superintendent in 2014 after a search committee recommended him based on his impressive record of achievement. He has spent the last 25 years as an educator in various capacities, gaining the kind of experience that positions him to take on the role of superintendent, which is why he's before us for consideration tonight. In his role as assistant superintendent, Greg helps guide the leadership of our 29-member district team. During a time of significant change, he led a 59-member curriculum leadership team and facilitated the development, implementation, and evaluation of our pre-K through 12 curriculum. He chaired the district's curriculum advisory committee, professional development committee, and its technology committee. He also took the lead in reviewing and evaluating results of school-wide assessment programs and helping teachers put the data to good use for teaching and learning. Prior to coming to Northborough Southborough, he served as an elementary school principal for 7 years, first at the Lester Memorial School and most recently at Edward Hopkins School in Hopkinton. In these positions, Greg had responsibilities ranging from designing, implementing, and managing programs to meet the needs of each school, to developing, evaluating, and revising school curriculum. He worked collaboratively with various groups, including PTAs, special education advisory groups, and school councils. And of course, he was responsible for supervising and evaluating school faculty and staff. Before he became a principal, Greg was Director of Technology for the Hopkinton Public Schools from 2005 to 2007. In that position, he chaired the Hopkinton Public School Technology Plan Committee, implemented the school's strategic technology plan, and developed the technology budget. From 2000 to 2005, Greg was Director of Technology, Curriculum, and Assessment for the Lester Public Schools. This position had similar responsibilities to the Hopkinton one, along with responsibility for developing, implementing, and evaluating the district's curriculum and professional learning environment. He also chaired the district's curriculum, technology, and data analysis committees. Greg has experience in the classroom as well, having served as a teacher from 1993 to 1997 at schools in his home state of Vermont, as well as in Westwood, Mass. Finally, Greg is well educated, with a bachelor's degree from Northern Vermont University and a master's in education from Lesley University in Cambridge. He has completed doctoral courses at UMass Amherst and has been accepted to the Northeastern University's Law and Policy doctoral program. With that, I'd like to invite Greg to come on up and for your interview. We're going to start with just some opening remarks from Greg.
I might need some more room here. So thank you very much for those remarks. Chairperson Desmond, Chairperson Winter, and Chairperson Lawrence, and school committee members, I'm honored and humbled to be here to interview for the position of Superintendent of Schools for the Northborough, Southborough, and Northborough Southborough districts. I grew up in a family who valued the importance of education. As a young child, I fondly remember my mom bringing me to her school as she worked to prepare her classroom for her students. I remember sitting around the dinner table and listening to my mom's stories of what happened at school that day. I remember how hard my mom worked every evening preparing and planning to make sure she was ready for the next day. Most importantly, I remember that she truly enjoyed the work as an educator. I can remember one day when when she was driving me to school, and I wanted her to go faster. And she turned and looked at me and said, and what message would I be sending to you and my students if I were pulled over speeding? She then said, integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. That was a very powerful moment for me, and that is something I bring to work every day, doing the right thing. And the core value of an integrity is one that is important and essential. My father was equally a positive role model, and I carried his words of wisdom with me every day. He modeled the power of hard work, learning from mistakes, being respectful, and having an optimistic attitude. Recently, I was rooting around in some of his papers that my mom had asked me to go through, and I came across a certificate with my dad's name on it, and it read, President of the Optimism Society. I showed this to my mom, and I kind of chuckled and laughed. And she then told me the story that my dad had started this society, but it disbanded 2 years later out of a lot of negative meetings. So I bring to my work an optimistic attitude and a belief that there's something to be learned from every person I meet, and that every person I meet has an important story to tell, from students to educators to parents. So over the last 2 decades serving in educational organizations in many different roles, I've had the privilege of working alongside outstanding educators, principals, directors, and superintendents, many of which became my mentors. Superintendent Dr. Michael DeBrule taught and modeled for me that building professional and collegial relationships are essential. His consistent message was, make sure you are taking the time to build collegial and professional relationships. It will serve you well as you lead an organization. I bring to the work a belief that the work is about developing people and building relationships at all levels. Another mentor, Dr. Jack Phelan, a retired superintendent from Hopkinton Public Schools, was exceptional at identifying and recruiting and sustaining great educators. He was always speaking about the great potential in others and was constantly bragging about his employee or that employee, this employee or that employee, and that his success was dependent upon their successes. He also worked hard to develop leaders and expand their capacity and confidence. He was constantly thinking outside the box and always asked, and how will this benefit our students? I bring to the work a belief that students are at the center of the work, and that the role of an educator is the most important role in the district, and hiring and retaining outstanding educators, school and district leaders, is essential to ensure excellent outcomes for students. Lastly, I have great respect and appreciation for the public schools of Northborough and Southborough. The communities have high expectations, value education, and are active participants in the process. The students are amazing and are at the center of the work. The educators, educational staff, support staff, and the school leadership team care deeply about educating students and work tirelessly on students' behalf. I believe that my collective experience in leadership roles, from classroom teacher, director of technology, building principal, to assistant superintendent, my core values of respect, integrity, and excellence, and belief that students are central to the work, make me a great fit for the position as the district's next superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. So we'll start with the questions, and as we talked about last night, I think Joan brought a good point where each, if you did have a follow-up question because the question wasn't answered completely, or then you're allowed one follow-up question just to help us go through. There's a lot of questions and efficiently. So if there is a follow-up question, you can ask it. If there's not, don't ask. Thank you. We'll begin with Kelly.
Please describe your greatest strength and your greatest opportunity for growth and how you plan to approach that growth opportunity.
So I think one of my greatest strengths is my ability to arrange and organize and orchestrate, and using the people around me to help achieve larger goals. I'm not always the most knowledgeable person in the room, but I know how to organize people around me to ensure that focused goals and tasks are being accomplished, and how to maximize the people around me. So that's one of, I think, a strength that I have, arranging and coordinating and working with people and collaborating and facilitating work that needs to be accomplished and holding people accountable for that work. An area of growth for me in this position is experience. I have not sat in the role as a superintendent, and I think it's one of those roles that you don't gain experience until you sit in the seat and you have some experience behind you and you do this day to day. So I think an area for growth for me is doing the job, gaining experience around being a superintendent, and meeting the challenges day to day around what that job brings.
Thank you. Greg, 5 years ago, you came to us with a variety of experiences from different districts. How do you expect what you learned from these experiences can benefit Northborough, Southborough School District?
So,
Sorry. I'll say the next part later.
Sure. So I think that, not having, joining Northborough, Southborough, and Northborough Southborough Regional School System, I was new to the organization. I spent a lot of time listening and connecting and building relationships. So I think one of the benefits of that I bring to this position is that I have established positive working relationships with many people across the district. I know the strengths of the organization in terms of people who work in the system. I know the strength of the leadership team. I also know that it's a complex system, that when I first took the job as assistant superintendent, I honestly did not know how complex the organization was, with 3 school committees, 3 budgets, many demands, 10 schools, 29 members of the leadership team, complex, political environments in terms of what happens at the town and the state level. It's a complex district because of the way it's organized, but it's also a very well-run district. There's a lot of great efficiencies and a lot of collaboration across the 2 towns. I think what I've learned most is that the strength of the organization lies with its educators and students. And the work that we do as a leadership team and as a central office has to focus on what happens in the classroom and how it benefits students. And I think that one of the goals really for me and as a superintendent is to bring coherence to the work, that we have a lot of initiatives working in silos, and oftentimes we don't stop and think about what that feels like as an educator in a classroom, making sure that all of those initiatives have meaning to the educator and they're not separate, and there's not initiative fatigue from the educator's standpoint. I've learned, working closely with Superintendent Johnson and town officials, the positive working relationship that the two towns have with the school systems. There's constant communication and feedback around goals, fiscal constraints, and what's happening at the town level. The police chiefs, Chief Paulus and Chief Liver, and the fire chief, Morrow, and fire chief Parente have been exceptional in terms of collaborating around school safety. So I know that there's a team, it's a team approach in the towns of Northborough and Southborough. There's great community support for the schools, and I hope to bring that, continue to foster that as the potential next superintendent.
Thank you. And I do have a follow-up. Are there any particular approaches, programs, initiatives, or practices that you can envision implementing here that maybe you've seen in past districts that you've worked for?
I think that I think one of the areas of growth for our districts is we've done a nice job of bringing parity to resources and materials to students and teachers. So that continuum of experience, no matter if you're in a classroom, fourth grade classroom in Northborough or a fourth grade classroom in Southborough, there is a consistency of experience and a consistent curriculum. I think one of the areas we really need to focus in now on, what do we do when students are struggling with learning? What are the interventions? So really looking at creating an intervention model for students who might need some extra support, and also looking at programs where kids can accelerate through learning, so we can change the pace and provide students to move at the pace that they need, so they can maximize their learning and not hold kids back because of the constraints of maybe a potential classroom. So building models, more structured models around intervention for students and being more strategic about those interventions, and also providing opportunities for acceleration for students so that they can move through content in a way that meets their needs.
As an internal candidate who has seen the operation of our 3 districts firsthand, please identify some of the challenges faced by the districts and any ideas you have for addressing them. And can you identify an initiative you would like to implement for the K-8 districts and one you'd like to implement for the regional district?
So I think that one of the upcoming challenges that the district face is we're entering year 3 of the collective bargaining agreements with our 8 associations. So I think one of the upcoming challenges next year is to continue to collectively bargain with our associations for the next agreements. I think that we've established very positive working relationships with our associations. It's been very collaborative. There's open lines of communication, but I see that as some important work that needs to be done next year. I also look at, if we look at our strategic plan, Vision 2020, strategically planning for the future, that sunsets next year. And I think much work needs to be done around reauthorizing that plan and having conversations around, what's the next strategic plan look like for our districts. So I think that's an opportunity and a challenge. And then I think, in terms of a challenge and an opportunity, we have some key positions to be filled at the district level. Currently, we have an interim director of finance. We need to make sure that we find the best candidate in terms of a director of finance that's going to be capable of doing the job and willing to stay in the district for several years and do some great work. We also have our district nurse coordinator recently retired, so we have that position to fill, and that's an essential position in our district in terms of coordinating what happens in terms of health services for our students. So I think one of the challenges is just finding great people to work in our organization. I think we need to do a better job of recruiting and actually go out and recruit people to join the district, do talent searches, and make sure we're getting the best people possible to work with us. I think in terms of the challenges also, I think in the next several years we'll see tightening physical realities in the larger context of economics in our country, and I think there will be a trickle-down effect to both our communities and our state. A lot of what drives the work we do financially at the town level is from the state. So I think that's a potential challenge to see what those impacts are going to be and to be able to look closely at our budgets and work within a very tight physical, financial constraints that might exist. So I think that's a potential challenge, but it's, I think, also an opportunity is we have declining enrollments. If you look at the next 3 to 5 years, we do have some declining enrollments, and I think that's a challenge. I think the enrollments are divided or spread across many classrooms. So it's difficult just to, remove or lay off or reduce teachers by one, because, those students are across many grade levels in many classrooms. So I think looking closely at how we can sustain staff, sustain the high-quality programs that we have, and doing it in a fiscal responsible way. In terms of an initiative that I'd like to implement for the K-8 districts, so I think we've done a lot of work with, STEM. I think that we have pockets of innovation happening in our districts, K through 8. I think we have computer science programming happening in pockets, and looking at ways we can make those experiences more systemic across the program for all students, and more embedded in the curriculum. And I've seen, there's districts that have done this well, and it's seamless and it's a part of the reality of a student's day-to-day experience. In terms of an initiative at the high school that I'd like to implement at the regional high school, I think there are a lot of initiatives happening at the high school right now. They're piloting schedules. I think we're doing instructional rounds. We're realigning our social studies curriculum to the new history and social science framework that was just created. We are implementing MCAS 2.0. I think right now at the high school, there are a lot of initiatives underway, and I think one of the things we need to do is slow down, make sure we're doing what's being implemented well, and give that some time and build coherence around those. So it makes sense for students and it makes sense for teachers.
Good evening, Greg. And thank you for being here tonight. And before I ask my question, I would just like to say that I appreciated your opening remarks and bringing some laughter to the table, which was great. And I think that you were raised by two fine parents who talk about some great qualities, optimism and especially integrity, and it is when nobody is watching. So hats off to your parents. My question is a two-parter, so I'll give you the first one, and it comes under the topic of leadership and management. How would you develop your plan to prepare for and begin your superintendency?
So I think that I would develop an entry plan, the first 100 days, and set some goals around seeking input and feedback from the community, from faculty and staff, from the larger community, from town officials to parents, and to students. And I'd hold many opportunities for focus groups, listening sessions, so I can get a sense of what the goals are of the community, what the concerns are of the community, what the hopes and dreams are of the different stakeholders. And I think that the first few months would be doing a lot of visiting, a lot of observing, holding a lot of focus groups, and beginning that process of building relationships with people across our 10 schools, with the town officials, with community members and parents. And my priorities would be to listen, to be open-minded, to be respectful of the information that I receive, and a priority would be for me would just to be present and visible across our 10 schools as much as I could.
Can I have a follow-up? Just for clarification, you talked about that entry plan for the first 100 days and doing the focus groups. Would you see that taking place before the beginning of next year? Would this be something in the spring of 2019 in the summer, or would you wait until September?
So, excuse me. So I would establish the plan, before I took the position. and you know, the first 100 days and be very clear about my approach to the entry into the position. But I wouldn't begin the entry plan until I actually started July 1. But obviously I'd be doing, you know, in between I'd be doing a lot of studying, a lot of reviewing of data, looking at key documents, being a part of every meeting that I possibly could in terms of work that Superintendent Johnson is engaged in, and to make sure that I have the knowledge to be able to continue the different initiatives that are underway, and so it's a seamless transition come July 1.
Okay, thank you very much.
Also under leadership and management, what is your approach to building relationships and positive morale with administration, teachers, and staff? And can you give an example of how you have promoted positive morale as assistant superintendent?
So I think that, you know, one of the things, you know, I have many conversations with, you know, administration, teachers, and staff. It's something that I do on a regular basis. It's a very important part of my job. I ask, you know, when I meet someone, I always ask, how is it going? You know, what are your challenges? You know, and over time, I've gotten to know people in terms of what their goals are, what their challenges are, and really trying to support their work in their roles. I think that I model respectful behavior. You know, I'm always respectful to everyone I meet. You know, I think that I try to model a high work ethic. I try to model, you know, the type of thinking that I expect from others. You know, I make sure that my purposes are very transparent and clear, so that there's no guessing of you know, what I'm about and what my goals are. I think that I also value others' input and feedback, and you know, that it's important for them to know that they're an equal member at the table. You know, I think one way you build morale and a positive culture is engaging in the work, and building confidence and acknowledging when good work is done, achieving a common goal as a team, and, you know, celebrating success. You know, I think of many examples where, you know, we've had hard work to positive outcomes, and it was a collective and collaborative process. I'm thinking with working with a curriculum leadership team around science and the work that we did to implement the new science standards pre-K through 12. It was a teacher-led initiative. We have teacher leaders who do outstanding work. We set goals. We assessed and evaluated our current program. We looked at other districts. We talked about a vision for science in our district. We did a crosswalk about what are we doing currently that already aligns to the new standards. We set a 3-year plan around how we wanted to implement this, to give teachers time to be able to understand and learn the new standards and engage in professional learning around the science standards. And we then implemented. We are in year 3 of our 3-year plan, and I think it's gone very well. I think, you know, the outcome has been students engaged in inquiry science, pre-K through 12. Grades 6 through 12, a lot of experiences were already happening, so were tweaks to courses. So Department Chair Lori Zanini helped with that work, did an outstanding job. At the elementary level was really talking about more experiences for students, so we actually increased the time that students were engaged in the work of science. So this will conclude year 3 of our plan, and the next step will be to circle back and assess how we're doing. Is the program impacting student learning as we had set out to, and is our vision still being met that we set? So I think, empowering people to provide input and feedback, working toward a common goal, implementing and following through helps build positive relationships when you have a common experience. That happens very easily. In terms of administration, work obviously very closely with the leadership team at the central office and at the building level. It's listening to their needs and their challenges. It's being there when they have a question or they're struggling with a difficult situation, asking questions to get them to think about how they want to approach it, and providing guidance. Ensuring that they have my confidence in the work that they're doing. I have, experience being a principal. I've sat in the chair of the principal. Is incredibly challenging and complex work. So I can empathize with the work that they do and many of the challenges they face and the importance of their work. So being there and being visible and being supportive of their work. And also similarly with teachers to administrators is engaging in the work. So the work around instructional rounds, we had a cohort of school-based leaders and district leaders who were trained in the instructional rounds model. We worked tirelessly to create a plan, to set goals, to think about how we'd implement instructional rounds in our district. I think the team did an outstanding job, and it was a very collaborative dialogue and conversations. And I think, although it took us a little bit longer than we had hoped, we finally this year are implementing instructional rounds across our 10 schools, and it's largely in part due to the collaboration and hard work of that cohort, who are the early adopters, who trained the leadership team and then helped implement. So I think, again, by engaging in the work, by having positive outcomes, by encouraging people to take risks, try new ideas, and have open and honest conversations, I think that's the way I think morale is built over time, and that's the way I've conducted myself in the district.
So this is the last in leadership and management. How would you describe your approach to decision-making, especially on major issues that affect many stakeholders? What interpersonal skills can you bring to bear to navigate conflict and gain consensus? Please use examples if you can.
So, I think that, there are a lot of complex issues that we have conversations about as a school system, as towns, and as communities. I think that one of those conversations that we've been engaged in over the past 4.5 years I've been here is school start time. That potentially could impact every student, every family, pre-K through 12. So I think the first thing is to make sure that the issue is studied, that there's a strong understanding of what the issues are, and those are clear. Making sure you understand the science around school start time is one example. Making sure you understand what the impacts are, what the benefits are, and making sure that there's opportunities to have a group kind of be an early adopter in terms of studying and researching and thinking about a major initiative. I think at that point then it needs to be, the school committee needs to be part of that work, but then it needs to be presented to the larger community in the sense that this is the information on, this is the science behind sleep and how it impacts, developing minds. Educating the larger community in many different forums, talking about what the issues are, making sure you have opportunities for stakeholders to engage in their viewpoint and ideas around what they think a potential solution would be. So engaging as many people early on in the conversation around what the issues for a particular topic is essential. And then I think you have to create opportunities for discourse and dialogue. And then I think eventually you need to come to some type of consensus around, you know, here's the science, you've collected input and feedback. You know, here are 3 options, and get feedback around that. And then eventually present those options and allow stakeholders to share their thoughts. But eventually you have to make a decision. You have to think about, you know, the financial implications of a decision that you're making. You have to make sure that, you know, the school committee is on board and is engaged and is, you know, you have support, and you have to make the community is supportive of a decision. And then you seek input and then make a decision to move forward. What interpersonal skills can I bring to navigate in conflict and gain consensus? There'll always be opposing viewpoints to controversial topics, whether it's school start time or changing a schedule, or offering a new program. And I think you need to have your rationale clear. And it needs to be compelling. It needs to be student-centered. I think all aspects of a decision needs to be thought through clearly, how it would what implications it would have for each stakeholder. I think you need to engage the community in those conversations, and eventually come to a recommendation to the community to make a larger decision around. I listen, I research, I take a lot of input and feedback, and I'm able to synthesize that into a clear direction. And I think when there is conflict, I'm okay with that. You know, I think it's hard on ideas, easy on people, and I think as long as the discourse is respectful, I think that conflict can be a healthy part of making and coming to a decision. In terms of an example, so at one of the elementary schools I was principal at, we did talk about changing the school start time and actually switching with one of the other elementary schools. It was a conversation that started at the school council level. Parents were very invested in, they wanted their students to start school a little bit earlier. The conversation really needed to be had at the superintendent level. So they brought the information to me. We had conversations with the superintendent. We researched the options. We met with teachers that would be impacted at the lower school and at the middle school. And eventually, we came up with a plan that addressed the challenges that the school council brought forth, that met the needs of all the stakeholders, and actually was in the best interest of the students. The year it was implemented, I actually left to be the assistant superintendent here, but it was a lot of conversation and dialogue around making a change that impacted many families and having many opportunities for families to engage in that conversation and giving families time to adjust schedules and to adjust to the change that was going to take place.
Mr. Martin, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Let's move on to teaching and learning, shall we? This is a two-part question, but it's the same theme, so I'll read both together. What are the most important elements in terms of ensuring the district meets the needs of all learners? And how do you assess the effectiveness of both special education programs and those targeted at advanced learners?
So I think that you need a continuum of programs, pre-K through 12. I think that we do have a lot of different types of learners in our organization. I think we have a lot of opportunities in different types of programs students can engage in depending on their needs. I think important elements in terms of ensuring that we meet the needs of all learners is first, the core curriculum and core instruction is strong and is aligned to what we want students to be able to know and do when they leave a grade level or they graduate from our high schools. I think we need to make sure that there are supports for students who might need smaller interventions if they're not able to meet a learning target, and making sure that we have the support staff and the expertise to make sure that that extra dose and maybe reading fluency is available for students, or maybe they need extra work in mathematics, and they don't need 5 years of work. They need maybe a 6-week intervention to be able to meet the needs. So making sure we have adaptable and flexible learning environments for that to happen. So, and then making sure we have specialized programs for students to meet the needs. So we have, we launched a language-based program to meet the needs of students who have language-based disabilities and need a more targeted and focused language instruction. So we established a program within our district so that students weren't going outside outside of our district to receive those services. It was happening within our towns of Northborough and Southborough. We have many programs to service the needs of students at that, who receive special education. I think making sure that we have strong assessments and consistent assessments so that we're constantly monitoring how students are performing, and we're adjusting our practice when we're seeing students are struggling with a concept. And additionally, for students who might already know the content. So, if you give a pre-assessment and the student has already mastered all the content, we need to make sure that there are opportunities for students to be able to accelerate through curriculum and actually go to the next level and engage in challenging coursework. So in terms of how do we assess the effectiveness of both special education programs and those targeted at advanced learners, I think we look at the types of programs that we're offering, the continuum of services pre-K through 12. I think we look at students' individualized education plans to see how students are accomplishing the goals set out in their plans. We look at, are we not able to service students within our district? We're not able to meet the needs of students within our setting. And do we need to create programs so we can keep students within our educational setting, for the best interest of students and to keep them connected with their peers within Northborough and Southborough. In terms of those targeted at advanced learners, I think, again, having common assessments around what content, knowledge, and skills we're trying to help them achieve, making sure that the data around those advanced learning programs shows that students are achieving at a high level and growing. And I think an important voice to all of these students is the student, having conversations around, are we meeting your goals? What are your goals as a learner? Are you excited and passionate about learning? Do you feel challenged? And making sure that, the external metrics, at the high school, AP scores, SAT scores, students are performing well at. So those are all ways to kind of measure the effectiveness of those programs. Having conversations with teachers around, do they feel they have the tools and resources and skill sets to meet the needs of kids and to operate programs. Assessment, looking at our programs, having conversations with teachers, looking at the needs of our students and making sure that we have a continuum of services for all students, whether special ed or students who need acceleration through their learning pathway.
So, school start time and student are big concerns among many constituents. You've addressed start time, but stress is becoming more and more a focal point of parents and homework and time that the kids are constantly have no downtime. How would you approach the issue of student stress?
So I think that the expectations and demands of our students are great. I'll go back to that idea of coherence. If you look at a student's experience in our system pre-K through 12, the number of educators that student will engage in over his or her schooling experience is probably well over 150 different connections with adults, and that's probably a conservative number. We need to make sure we're helping students use time, resources, and materials to access content, and we need to make sure we are coherent in our approach. If a student transitions and every time has to learn a new system or a new organizational strategy or a new set of language, because it's different from grade level to grade level or course to course, that's not efficient. I think we need to look at consistent ways that students are organizing time, resources, and materials across the pre-K through 12 continuum, so that when they transition from 6th grade to 7th grade, the same types of organizational strategies and techniques to organize time and content and materials are used, to also ensure that language is consistent across their experience. At the high school level, making sure that there's coherence in terms of, if a student is taking a series of courses that, the last week of before break, there are not, 6 high-stakes assessments that student is taking, or that the homework load for a particular night isn't aligned, that all 6 of the teachers have given a pretty significant homework load. So we need to make sure we have coherence and a plan, so that when we think of the whole student and the collective experience, to make sure it's coherent and streamlined and efficient. And I think a lot of times students are stressed because they're trying to figure out what the expectations are, that there is not necessarily alignment in terms of the number of assessments they're being given on a particular day or a particular week, or that they have so much homework because, again, there's not coordination between the teachers around, what's the math, what's the science, what's the ELA, and looking at it holistically. I think a lot of work can be done to making sure that there's coherent transitions, there's common language, and more coordination around kind of the tasks and assignments that we provide kids. And I'm not saying that's easy. I think at the high school level that is very complicated and challenging. But I think that with the role of technology, that's something that I think we can improve on and do a better job for our students.
Thank you.
Another two-parter. Given the different budget realities year to year for each town, do you think it's possible to achieve uniformity and equity in terms of educational programming between the Northborough and Southborough K-8 schools? And if so, how would you go about doing that? And do you think there are any non-budgetary ways to achieve equity so students are on the same footing when entering Algonquin?
So, I think obviously there are different budget realities. The town of Northborough and Southborough financial realities are different. But I think the role of the leadership team is to, think about one community of learners and that experience, and eventually they all will go to Algonquin. So making sure there is parity in experience for students. I think uniformity and equity are different. I think I think what we need is common outcomes and expectations for students in terms of what we want them to know and be able to do. And I think there are different ways in order to achieve those goals. And I think it can vary from school to school, district to district. But in terms of equity, there needs to be consistent understanding of what we want students to know and be able to do and master when they leave a grade level or transition to a new school or reach Algonquin Regional High School. I think that the district has done a nice job of making sure there's parity of resources in mathematics, in science, in ELA. And a lot of that work isn't necessarily a financial implication in terms of buying a new program or buying a new set of materials. A lot of times it's getting the right people around the table, having our literacy specialists in Northborough and Southborough sit at the table on a regular basis, having conversations about what good instruction in literacy looks like, developing common understandings and common practices and common outcomes, and doing that work around professional learning with our educators to make sure that there is a consistency of experience for students. So I do think it is something that we can do, and I think there are many non-budgetary ways to achieve equity. I think one of the benefits of being a regional school system is we can leverage the expertise across the three systems. We maximize our professional learning experiences by collaborating as a pre-K through 12 organization. And there are a lot of great innovations and a lot of great work that happens through conversations and dialogues and teachers working together collaboratively on building, again, commonalities and making sure there's, we're clear on what we want students to know and be able to do regardless of which elementary school they're in, whether it's Northborough or Southborough.
Thank you.
All right, now we move on to communication. How would you assess the effectiveness of the district's current level of communication with parents and the community at large? And where do you see room for improvement, and how would you address it?
I think one of the strengths of communication is at the school level. I think our school leaders do an outstanding job communicating with parents, educators, providing many opportunities for parents to engage in what's happening at school. I think the principals do a commendable job. I think that, I get all of their emails on a weekly basis. They use social media. They have coffee hours. They have many different ways for parents to engage in the school community. I think at the district level, I think there is definitely room for improvement. I think we need to model the same type of communication strategies and methods that happen at the school-based level. I think we need consistent communication to the school community about what's happening, things we should be celebrating. I think using social media is something that is one way we can celebrate all the great events that are happening across our district. So more consistent communication on a frequent basis. I think having opportunities, having coffees on a regular basis, community forums on a regular basis, so that the leadership team at the central office can engage in conversations with community members, having that open opportunity consistently is essential. So I think at the community at large, I think we can do a better job of communicating more frequently, engaging people on the topics at hand, using social media to get people's input and feedback and getting them engaged in the work. And I think that, again, I think we need to model, learn from the models that are happening at our elementary schools and apply those models at the district level.
It's not necessarily crossing a follow-up question, on that same path of communication. How have you built lines of communication with the various district stakeholders, such as principals and others on the leadership team, and faculty, community leaders, business interests, and families?
So I think in terms of various district stakeholders, such as principals and other on the leadership team, the meeting structure that we have around, meeting with Northborough principals and Southborough principals, meeting with Algonquin principals and the NASA leadership team. I think it's essential to have face-to-face conversations around the topics on teaching and learning. I think that's the most important thing, is to meet regularly, to have focused agendas, and to talk about the work. And again, the work is educating students. I think we use a lot of shared documents and collaborative documents to do work offsite. So a lot of times, some of the work after a meeting will be followed up through kind of virtual teams and virtual work. I think that has proved to be an effective method for engaging all stakeholders in the work, keeping them in the loop, and involving them in the creation of some of the projects that we're working on. I think email, keeping people in the loop in terms of, some of the things to look, ahead to, some of those more administrivia communications, and making sure that principals and administrative team, they know where they're supposed to be and understand what some of those dates and those key events are. And then a lot of the communications, it's, picking up the phone and having direct conversations with people, whether they have a question or whether you're checking in, and I do that frequently. I also, try to meet with principals on a regular basis to think about, again, to have conversations around teaching and learning, what's happening in their buildings, and how I can support their work. In terms of community leaders and business interests and families, I think that when we're implementing or launching, a new strategic plan, I'm thinking of the technology implementation plan. There's a lot of communications around, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. We asked for community participants. We made sure that there were many opportunities for parents and families and business members to participate in that process. We had open forums. We engaged in surveys, and we had a lot of input. Eventually, we created a district technology implementation plan. It was really a partnership with the director of technology at the time, myself, and this team, and I think that worked well. There were plenty of opportunities to engage, many different ways to engage in that work and provide input, and it was centered around a topic and a goal that we had as a district.
Okay, now we're going to switch to budgeting. So tell us about your approach to and experience with the budgeting process, both as a principal and as an assistant superintendent. And how has that lens changed since you became an assistant superintendent?
So from a principal perspective, I've been fortunate to work with, some very talented superintendents. And the budgeting process has always started around, what are the goals and outcomes we're trying to achieve as a larger district. Looking at the strategic plan, and I'll speak to my experience in Hopkinton, and what are our priorities, not looking necessarily at any fiscal numbers or realities, but just saying, what do we hope to accomplish? What are our hopes and dreams around the budget process? what do we want to achieve in terms of student learning? And then looking at what our school improvement plans articulated in terms of the work that was happening. So making sure that the budget process was driven around achieving goals and focusing on impacting student learning in the classroom. As a, as a district level, I've been involved in, as a principal in developing the district-wide budget and understanding also that there's a larger context. What I need as a principal for my building might be a lower priority to a need maybe of another building for that year. But it's always been a conversation around, yes, that's a priority at the middle school. We need to make sure we make that happen for our students. So this year, we're going to set aside this budget priority at the school that I worked at. From the building principal role to having many conversations with the faculty and staff around, again, what goals are we trying to achieve? What are our hopes and dreams? Looking at staffing and what we want to hope to accomplish. Talking about the tools and resources they feel they need to, to receive in order to do the best job that they can, and having them given an opportunity to present what they would like to see in the budget. And then taking all that information and synthesizing it and coming with a school-based budget, working closely with the school council, members of the parent community to get feedback from school council around what they think the budget priorities should be and their opinions of the budget. And then finally presenting that to the superintendent and then arguing, why we need something or what our goals are. Eventually that would be placed in a larger context of a larger district budget. It was always very collaborative. It was always very team-driven, goal-centered. As an assistant superintendent, the lens has changed in terms of obviously my perspective. Because we're involved in 10 different schools, 2 different towns, a regional school system. It's very complex and very timely, but it always centers around what goals we want to accomplish and achieve. What are we trying to achieve in the Southborough K-8 budget? Understanding what our fiscal and financial constraints are in terms of, the context of the larger town, and working very closely with the leadership team to develop, budgets that meet their goals, that's aligned with the district goals, and helps us grow incrementally. One of the things that I've learned, a new lens, is just the sheer complexity of a regional school system budget, and also the challenge around budgeting when you don't always have predictable numbers you're working with at the time of when you're creating the budget. So not having accurate numbers around regional transportation reimbursement, not knowing what your Chapter 70 dollars might look like, or what the reimbursement rate for a circuit breaker might look like. So those are all variables that you have to kind of predict and think about, but you're just making projections. I think that has been challenging. I also think at the regional level, understanding that that the operational costs, the cost of health insurance and liability insurance and all those components of a budget that typically a pre-K through 8 town would support and work with. The regional budget, that is a responsibility and that is a component of the budgeting process. And then the assessments, understanding the impacts of the regional budget on the 2 towns of Northborough and Southborough, and thinking about how enrollment plays an impact on the percentage of the assessment. So I've I've come to appreciate the complexities of a regional system and impact that it can have on the communities of Northborough and Southborough. And I think, although it's more complex, what is true for me is that the budget needs to be, you're part of a larger ecosystem, you're part of the town. A collaborative process is essential. The town administrators in the town, John Kader and Mark Purple do an exceptional job communicating and working with the school systems. I think the school committee does an excellent job in setting budget priorities. That allows us to have conversations with the leadership team around, again, what goals do we want to accomplish, what incremental growth are we trying to achieve, and then creating a line item budget that we can present to the communities that, again, is fiscally sound and educationally responsible.
Okay. Continuing along with budgeting, given the community demands value for their tax dollars, how would you ensure budgets are as compact and efficient as possible while leaving room for trying new innovative programs or approaches?
So I think that, obviously it's, when we're creating the budget, it's essential to think about, the impact on the larger, town budget and the larger impact to the taxpayer in terms of tax dollars. Again, working very closely with the town administrators and getting our parameters of what they would like us to operate within. So what percentage increase are they looking or not? I think as we look at our enrollment over the next 3 to 5 years, I think that's one way. We're going to have to look at attrition, retiring staff members, to make sure that, we reduce the budget to meet the reduced enrollment. And I think, innovative programs and approaches don't always need to cost money. I think there's a lot of opportunities for grants, but I think about the innovative programs that our educators are bringing to the table. It's not always a program, it's an innovative way of thinking, it's a new way to approach a task. It's bringing in business leaders to the ecosystem of education. So it doesn't always have to be a dollar amount. But I think when there are new programs, I'm thinking of history and social science, shifting dollars where we can, making sure that there is room for, curriculum implementation, new mandates, and I think we've done that in the past 4.5 years, being able to make movements and improvements, while also not going beyond what the town's box that they've provided the school system to work within.
Hi, Greg. We're going to talk about technology now. A few questions ago, in the section on communication, you were talking about an example of how you built lines of communication and used you talked about really the implementation of the technology plan. So this is really a two-part question, but they're linked pretty closely, so I'll just ask both parts at the same time. How do you view the role of technology in education? And what should the balance be between technology and traditional teaching? And how would you improve what the district and the teachers are doing to reach that balance?
So the role of technology in education, so I do view technology as just another tool, it's what we do with the technology, it's the programs, it's what it allows in terms of student access. I think technology has great potential in terms of providing opportunities where we can't provide opportunities within the district. Maybe there's, whether it's a virtual field trip or a virtual course, a course that we don't offer, or, we talked about accelerating, students, so maybe having high school seniors engage in college-level courses through online virtual courses. I think that as we look to the future, a lot of the resources that we're using are going digital. So a lot of the textbook companies are creating, a hard copy of the textbook, but they're also creating a virtual book. I think one of the benefits of one of the great works that I've seen in the use of technology in our district is the development of a digital resource to replace the purchase of a textbook. That was an open resource project. The investment the district made was in teachers' time to actually create that dynamic open source resource for students. So I think we have to look to the future, and I think a lot of the resources at the middle school and high school level are being digitized, and we need to provide tools for students to access that information. I think it's a great tool in terms of allowing teachers to get just-in-time data on students, to understand their students better. So when giving an assessment, getting the data back immediately so the teacher can think about, okay, who did well, who didn't well, where do I need to reteach, who do I need to accelerate. I think it provides a faster window to provide data to the teacher around students, and has the potential to create data dashboards for teachers around every student that we work with. I also think that, I think there's great potential around technology, but technology is not the silver bullet. I think there's a time and place for the use of technology. It's not all the time, and I think we have very experienced teachers who can use their professional judgment around when it's appropriate to use technology, or when it's a hindrance, when it's better for students to engage in face-to-face conversations on a particular problem, or when technology is the right tool because it's actually enhancing the experience for students. So I think it's important to improve, to provide teachers with opportunities to see how technology can engage that learning, but at the same time, I think there is a balance between working in groups and collaborating, using, lecturing to students, working in small groups with students, and I think it's a continuum of experiences. It's not all technology, or it's not all traditional. It's finding that balance in the middle. And I think it depends on the developmental level too, and the grade level. At the early childhood level, I think the more opportunities we can give students to engage in conversation, building with blocks, reading authentic texts, I think the more powerful that is, versus giving them a piece of technology to interact with. And again, I think it depends on the age level and what you're trying to accomplish from a teacher's perspective. And I think in terms of what would the district do to improve the balance, I think it's providing professional learning opportunities. We have teachers across our 3 districts who are doing this well, and it's one model that's worked well is where you have lab classrooms where it's working really well, and there is that balance. It's being used effectively. Working with those lab classroom teachers across our district, and having an agreement that, you know, this is the model that we want to create and further in our district. Would you be willing to have people, other colleagues come in and see it in action? Get an idea of what it looks like, and then partner with these lab classroom teachers around, how do I make it work for my classroom? And just providing many, many opportunities to engage in professional learning and actually seeing it in action are approaches that I would take.
The Bring Your Own Device program at the high school has not been without controversy, nor was it in its earlier effort in Southborough a few years ago. Can you discuss your thoughts on the implementation of the BYOD program and how the program should evolve in the coming years?
So I think that, I think this is one of the areas where it's an example of how we can improve communication with the communities. Although we did communicate, we did send out, emails. It's a great reminder that because you send out an email does not mean the message was received or that input was received. So I think in terms of, reflection, spending more time engaging the community, having focus groups, talking about the benefits of the BYOD and the challenges that parents may face by having a BYOD program. So, just in terms of reflection, improving the way we communicate as a district, why we're doing this, why we're moving forward, and opportunities for that feedback and input to help us move the program in a direction that meets the needs of students, the community, and teachers. I think that moving forward, how it should evolve, I think there needs to be a serious conversation around if we as a school district value technology, what is the best way to get the hands of technology into students? There is an equity issue when you have a BYOD program. I'd like to have conversations around, again, what are the goals of this one-to-one initiative? What outcomes are we trying to achieve? And then if those are important outcomes to us, the technology should be part of the operational budget. It should be a conversation. And potentially, many students may choose to bring their own device. Give that as an option. And then find out how many students would like us to provide a device. So maybe we don't need to provide, a device to every student, for the freshman class. Maybe it's 40% we need to purchase, and then 60% they'll choose to bring their own device in. So I think we need many more conversations. We need to engage the stakeholders. We need to look at, what are the potential financial or budgetary impacts of moving to providing the technology in the operational budget, and then make a decision around, is this, what do we value, and should the budget support this?
Thank you, Greg. And final question. Please tell us something that we won't find on your resume that would give us some additional insight into what kind of leader you would be.
So I think that, I think what's not on my resume that speaks about who I am. It's about who I am outside of the work of teaching and learning and being an assistant superintendent or principal. I value my time with my family. I'm blessed to have a supportive wife who, she's an educator. She's a preschool special needs teacher. She understands my work. She's doing very similar work. I have two great kids who, raising kids has been a challenge and the hardest work of my life, but the most rewarding work. So family is essential, and I think I try to model that as a leader, that in order to be great at your work, there are times where you need to step away, and you need to focus on your family and take time for yourself and make sure that you're ready the next day to come into to work and put your best work forward. I love to, when I do something, I'm very passionate about it. I love to garden. You know, I'm up early. During the summer months, I'm up at 4 o'clock. Well, I'm up that early usually anyway. I'm just not gardening in the winter. But I love to show off my gardens. They're pride and joy, and it's, for me, it's my stress relief, and it's my sanctuary, and there's nothing better than someone coming to my garden saying, "Oh, I love your garden." So I take great pride in it. And lastly, I love to run. Nature is very important to me. I try to get outside every day if I can. I love trail running, not because I love running, but because I love being on trails. I love being in nature, and I find that for me it helps. I could have a really difficult meeting or a difficult conversation, and it resets and re-energizes me. Those are not on my resume, but they're important to who I am, because I think that in order for me to be a leader in this district, whether it's an educator or a principal or a director, assistant superintendent or superintendent, you need to find a balance in your life. You need to find things that you're interested outside of the world of the work, so that you can disconnect and be ready to engage, whether it's the next week or next challenge or next school year.
Thank you.
Very good. I love gardening too, but I'm not very good at it. But I do understand the meditative process.
Yes.
Of it. So the next part, you can take a little break, a water break. The next part of our meeting is we can give our opportunity for our audience to come and either make comments or ask questions. And so I'd like to open it up to anyone who would like to come forward, if there is anyone. Okay. Terry will give you the mic and just identify yourself. That would be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Scalise. I have 2 kids at Proctor in Northborough, and I've spoke with Greg about some different issues, but one that I didn't hear spoken about was some bus issues, and I know that went on throughout Northborough schools and was something that a lot of parents showed some concern over, and I know that we spoke about some concerns as well. So I'm concerned moving forward. I know that there's been some talk about choosing another company or what that's going to look like moving forward, because I know safety was a big concern for all of us, and so I'm curious what your approach is moving forward.
Yeah. So thank you. Yes, busing was a challenge at the start of the school year. I think it also speaks to our need to improve communication at the district level. One of the things that we did was we consolidated routes to try to build some efficiency in the routes, and that wasn't well communicated to families. There wasn't enough time for input and feedback to families to adjust to that. And I think as a result, it presented a tremendous amount of challenges for families, for the bus drivers. At the same time, the bus company was having difficulties hiring and filling their buses with capable and competent bus drivers. There's a bus driver shortage nationwide. So one of the things that we had to look hard and close at, even though we want to build efficiencies, the number one priority is student safety. And although on a map, we asked the bus company to increase the distance between bus stops by, 0.2 of a mile. The reality is that our roads are challenging, that many of them are very narrow, and that although on a map you can do it, the reality is that you can't do it safely. So we spent a lot of time trying to correct those bus stops that were not safe and readjust routes. And we had a team at the central office trying to solve that, and they worked tirelessly to do that, and I think they did a great job given the situation. I don't want to go through that experience again. I think there are many lessons learned from what we can do better from a central office point in terms of communicating to parents the bus routes in a timely manner, to making sure that if there is a change in bus stops, that's communicated in a fashion that gives parents enough time to react. And also our work with the bus company in terms of driver protocol, making sure that the routes are completed in a timely manner so we can get those back out to the community. And you are correct. Next year is the final year of our 5-year bus contract with NRT, and we'll be going out for a proposal, transportation bid, and through that process we're going to be looking very closely at the contractual language to make sure it's very clear, and there are some pieces of that contract that actually are in there so that if the bus company does not fulfill its contractual obligations, there's actually some financial losses that they might incur as a result of it. So some incentives to do that. So again, those are some of the things we're looking at as we move toward the future.
Thank you so much.
So the first one is, my name is Carrie Trippi, and I have a first grade student at the Mary Finn School. I know you've met my son once. So I was wondering, I happen to have a son who learns a little bit differently. He is on an ed plan, doing well academically, but socially we have some challenges. And I'm wondering, what is your relationship with the Northborough, Southborough Special Ed Parent Advisory Council? And are there any changes or improvements you would work towards if you became the next superintendent?
So I think the NSPAC has done some amazing work over the years. I was very involved. I attended all the meetings, I would say, for the first 3 years. I haven't been as involved this year. Marie Allen, our Director of Student Support Services, and our 2 assistant directors have been leading that charge for the most part. But I think it's essential for the superintendent to participate in those meetings, engage in conversation, and it's a very important advisory group for the superintendent and the school committee. I think in terms of looking at social curriculum in our districts, I think that's one of the things we're talking about, building more coherence. We have several programs. We have Steps to Respect. We have Open Circle. Some classrooms are using Responsive Classroom, and trying to build coherence around, okay, what is our approach going to be, so kids have a common language as they transition from grade to grade, school to school. Again, they're hearing similar messages, and it's not confusing, and it's consistent for them. So.
That sounds good. And I love that you spoke about, talking to all stakeholders, and I think we lose sight of one of the most important stakeholders, which is the child, the student. So I happen to like that you mentioned, asking children themselves what's going well, what could go better. So I was wondering, do you have any example of, a time where kids themselves were given, the authority, not the authority, but the kind of permission to take control of their education a little bit more? I feel like that sometimes teachers and administrators can be intimidated by that, and I think it's a very powerful thing, whether you have a child that learns differently or not. And so I just was wondering if you could speak to that at all.
So I'll give an example of at the high school level. So one of the reasons why we began the process of researching learning management systems was because students came to us and said that they had, across their classes, they were engaging in 5 to 6 different learning management tools, depending on what that teacher was using. So some teachers were using Wiki, some teachers were using Google Classroom. So, and they found it incredibly confusing to try to manage and keep track of all these different learning management systems that they needed to engage in. So through their advocacy, they asked if we could research and look at a consistent learning management system at the high school level. They were part of the goal-setting team. They were part of the identifying different potential tools and resources, and they were part of the implementation team. So that's an example where student advocacy actually made a difference, and through their work, we ended up implementing a learning management system called Canvas. So.
Potentially that could happen at younger grade levels?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Hi. Hello. I'm Beth Dombacher, and one of the committee members asked you about stress for the students, and I'd like to take that a little bit further. When students are stressed and full of anxiety, they have a hard time coping, and so they act out. And traditionally, the response to a student acting out is a punitive approach, which research shows is not effective. So I'd like you to speak to that a little bit. Maybe, you know, how you feel about suspension, and if you have any thoughts on positive behavioral interventions.
So I think, I think giving students the tools and strategies, we did a lot of work with Jessica Minahan over the past several years in the behavior code.
Yes,
and
I've seen her twice.
Yeah. So really thinking about, how kids are presenting might be it might be that they're anxious. So really trying to understand, when students are anxious, how they present, and what tools and strategies we as educators can implement to help reduce the anxiety so it doesn't get to a level where the student is acting out. I think positive, PBIS is a great research-based program that can be implemented that is very effective in terms of making sure that the expectation's clear, making sure that there are avenues and pathways for students if they are feeling they're anxious or they can't cope with something. And I think behavior is a message. So kids don't inherently want to misbehave. Most kids want to do the right thing. And I think we need to be very careful about looking at what message students are sending when they misbehave at all levels. I think there is, in terms of suspension, I think it is a tool, but I think that is something that is used very cautiously, because removing a student because of a behavior from the school setting is serious, and it's used as a last resort, not as a first intervention. So again, PBIS I'm in favor for, restorative justice, understanding how students present and trying to understand what messages kids are sending us based on their behaviors is essential.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Foley-Mahopoulos. I live in Northborough. I have a son at the Z School. He's a kindergartner, and I also have a 3-year-old, which will be in the Z School eventually. And my question tonight is, Greg, how do you feel like your leadership style differs from your predecessors or the current superintendent?
Mm-hmm.
And then how are your leadership style, is there any similarities?
So I'll start with similarities.
Okay.
I think I spoke about some of my mentors along my journey. I view Superintendent Johnson as one of those mentors. I think where we have similarities is around our core beliefs and core values and work ethic. The commitment to excellence, integrity, respect. I think we both are extremely hard workers, and we both, it's not about us, it's about the work, and it's about how it impacts students. And, you know, I think we both love to learn. We both are energized when we have conversations and we're working on projects and working with people. And I think, you know, we have a lot of similarities in that area. Our leadership styles, our management styles are different in approach. I think I'm not as firm and direct on the outset as Christine, as the superintendent, is. That's very effective for her. I'm more apt to listen, to think, to have a conversation, and then move, and then think about what are the different avenues and pathways. I think Christine and I both believe the power of the principal and the influence the principal has on the role of teaching and learning in his or her building. I think my role, my approach to working with principals is more frequent meetings, more engagement, and try to be more visible at the school so I can see the work, so I can understand the work. And, you know, Superintendent Johnson has a lot more responsibilities. So, again, it's that experience. You can go into a position thinking I'm going to do X, and the realities of the job are Y. In order for the operations to run well, you need to take care of Y. So there are sometimes competing interests of why we can't get into classrooms as much as possible. But having collaborative conversations with principals on a regular basis, I think another difference is when we have meetings, making sure they're time-bound and targeted and specific. And I think one of my strengths is time management. When we meet, I'm very purposeful. I'm mindful of the time. I'm mindful that principals need to get back in their buildings to do the work in their buildings. Christine's, you know, this is, I'm not being critical, but Christine's meetings can be longer because she has a very different style in terms of how she operates. But again, I think there are more similarities than differences. I think, again, we both operate on the same core values. We both are extremely hard workers. We both, you know, understand the power of integrity, respect, and believe the work is about students, and the most important role in the district is that of a teacher.
Hello, welcome back, Mr. Lott.
Welcome back. Mel Lawton, a former administrator here at the Reach. If you don't mind, I'm not going to ask you any questions. I'm here really in support of Greg's candidacy. He's spoken about a lot of things tonight: integrity, respect. But he keeps using the word work. The work to Greg is something that has honor and dignity. And it's all about preparation of everybody for the sole purpose of providing the best educational experience for the kids. It's always about the kids with with Greg, excuse me. I have a cold, excuse me. I believe all of you have an incredible responsibility, and thank you so much for taking the time to really perform this really complicated task. You have the best candidate in your midst to be the next superintendent of this schools. And I encourage you to really think about that really long and hard. And I wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. First, I want to thank the committees for giving us the opportunity to share with you our thoughts. My name is Keith Lavoie. I am the principal of Trotter Middle School in Southborough. And I share these comments, not questions, Greg, so you can take a break. On behalf of myself, Principal Alana Sear from the Proctor School in Northborough, and Principal Kathleen Valenti for the Neary School in Southborough. They are both in attendance tonight. In the 19 years I've worked in the district, I've collaborated with some outstanding administrators. And I put Assistant Superintendent Martineau at the top of that list. His approach to problem solving, his appreciation of differing opinions, and his consistent support of our students and teachers is exemplary. Beyond the tangible accomplishments of his career is the manner in which he conducts himself. He is approachable. He is always a partner in taking on the next challenge. And being the superintendent is a very complicated situation. And the work requires a unique balance of skills, which I feel he possesses. Coupled with the skills is the knowledge of our district that cannot be replicated or substituted for. And because of that knowledge base and skills, I look forward to watching him put a plan in place that will move our 10 schools to the next level. I know him as a man of high integrity that has proven his commitment to our communities. And for those reasons, I 100% support Assistant Superintendent Martineau's candidacy. Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Any other comments? Going once? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Taylor. I live in Northborough, and I have a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old. So they're going to be coming to the Northborough Public Schools in a few years. And I was just wondering if you will continue to encourage the school committee to work towards free full-day K in Northborough.
So I think at the last Northborough K school committee, Superintendent Johnson proposed a plan to implement tuition-free full-day K. I'm in full support of the plan, and I would continue to support that plan. I think it is, fiscally sound and educationally responsible. So I'm behind it. I believe in the power of early childhood education, and I think it's a good plan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greg, it's been wonderful to hear your very thoughtful responses tonight. My name is Jen Suger. I'm an English language education teacher here at Algonquin. I'm a little bit tired now from the early start time that we have, so I apologize if my words aren't so coherent. And I started here at Algonquin when Greg started in the assistant superintendent position. And I come from years of experience in a couple of other districts, and he has been the most accessible and kind administrator at an upper level that I have ever worked for. Even though I'm just a teacher and I have a director of my program who works directly under him, he has always taken the time to meet with us, hear what our concerns are and our successes, and I really appreciate him for that. We only have about 250 students who are English learners, K-12 in the 2 towns, but again, he has always taken the time for them, and I appreciate that.
Just want to know that no one is just a teacher. Is that it? Well, thank you. I'd like to thank you all for participating, those that came to listen, and those that asked questions, and those that gave your viewpoints on Assistant Superintendent Martineau's candidacy. I just want to turn back if there was to open it up for any other questions that school committee members may have.
I would like to do a follow-up on the stress, and I can appreciate the approach with technology in making expectations more transparent, but I'd also like to get your thoughts about what do you think is an adequate amount of time spent on homework, say at the high school level. We'll just look at that, given the research that I know that you've read and we've talked about.
So I think that there's much research around the amount of homework and the threshold at which there's diminishing returns. So at the high school level, it's 90 minutes. 90 to 120 minutes typically is the threshold where that actually maximizes achievement. Anything more above 120 minutes, actually the research shows that there's not that much of a return in terms of student learning, and actually impacts students' stress levels, ability to engage in other activities, and have that downtime that's important for our kids.
Thank you.
So a question on your resume. For furthering education, it says that you were accepted for the Northeastern Doctoral Program in summer of 2019. Is that something that you are looking to continue with, and how would that impact if you were to be hired as the superintendent?
So, great question. It's a personal goal of mine is to earn my doctorate. This particular program is a cohort model. It's one weekend a quarter for a period of years and 2 weeks over the summer months. I plan on engaging in that work this summer. But I also am not making any decisions until I have all of the details of what my future is going to look like. So my plan is to, but if I have the honor and privilege of becoming the next superintendent, I need to think long and hard around what are my priorities and what is my focus and what is the balance that I can handle in terms of, being an excellent superintendent, being there for my family, and doing what I need to do to stay healthy and balanced.
Greg, my question as a follow-up goes on with visibility in schools. Listening to some of the questions that came up from the parents talking about stress, behavior problems, things happening with the kids, educational programs, busing. As they say, a picture tells you 1,000 words. So I think as an educator or as the leader of our schools is being visible in that, because you can see those things that are going on, or supporting your staff, supporting the students, and just knowing who you are. So, I mean, it's kind of hard because coming into this role, there's going to be a lot of things going on, but what do you see as your role and your visibility being in the schools?
Well, I think it's essential. I think that the great thing about being a superintendent is that you get to engage in all sorts of wonderful experiences, from concerts to plays to sporting events to engaging in science at the kindergarten level to, there's just a host of things, all things that I enjoy and all things that are important to be visible and to see. I think that it goes back to time management and making sure that in your schedule, that's a high priority of getting out to schools, having conversations with teachers, seeing the work, being invited to events that are happening in the evenings and on weekends and sporting events. It'd be a high priority for me to be visible. And because it's a high priority, I would make sure it happens.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, Roger.
Great question. Can you share with us what you feel the school committees can do to help support a superintendent in a, well, in general, but in a complex district like this?
So I think it's a great question. I think in order for one of the superintendent's key roles is working collaboratively with the school committee. I think communication is the foundation. I think communication about what's happening and also clearly define roles and responsibilities. So I think having clear communication, open communication and dialogue, clear information around what the roles and responsibilities are, and then having those common agreements around how we work and operate together, and how we disagree, and how we come to consensus. And when there is a challenging issue that is brought to the table, what are the pathways that we can use to problem solve, to become better, to make sure that, again, our work is focused on students. So what I would expect from a school committee is clear communication, support in the sense, making sure that, meetings are attended, that people are engaged in the work, that, in terms of, there's a lot of expertise around the table in terms of, financing, financials and budgeting, making sure that, the school committee continues to have, clear budget priorities that drive the process, and being very transparent with the superintendent. If there's something that is happening out in the community, making sure there's a clear communication to the superintendent about what that issue is, and giving the superintendent the information he or she needs to be able to address it or move forward, or take that information and add it to a larger context. So communication, roles and responsibilities, and being engaged in the work, and having clear processes for if there's disagreement or dissent, how that's handled within the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next part of the agenda is to have some final remarks.
So I just want to thank the committees for the time and the privilege to interview this evening. I have great respect for the towns of Northborough and Southborough and how they operate, and the commitment that the community has for education, the commitment that educators have to their students, and the quality of students that are that we have to work with is outstanding. I think that whatever decision the school committee makes, I'm in full support. My goal was to put myself in a position to compete for the position, and that was my only expectation. So I'm in full support of whatever the decision the committee makes. And I think what I'm excited about in terms of being the next superintendent really centers around 3 questions. And I'll leave those 3 questions with you. The first is, what are the hopes, aspirations, and dreams that our community has for our young people? What are the skills and habits of the mind that our children need for success in this rapidly changing and complex world? And lastly, what are the implications for the design of the learning experiences and equitable access to these experiences that we provide in our school systems? So again, those are some of the things that I'm excited about to engage in. I think they're important, essential questions that the community needs to work toward. And again, I thank you for your time. It's been an honor to be interviewed, and I respect your work greatly, and like to thank those who attended in the audience. Your support's appreciated. And your participation is appreciated.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to hear all your answers to all the myriad of questions and your perspective. And I thank you for your preparation and diligence in coming before us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I also would like to thank the committees for your questions that you submitted on such a quick turnaround. And there was a lot of thoughtfulness that was put in, and we tried to incorporate the questions that seemed to be the most, have major themes, and try to incorporate as many questions as we could. So, but I thank you for your diligence in getting them back to us. So,
So thank you very much.
Now we're going to talk about you.
Exit stage left.
Take 5 minutes.
yeah, why don't we take a little break, 5-minute break. Okay, so we are back in session. We just completed our interview with Assistant Superintendent Martineau. And so now we're at the portion of committee discussion. And in order to start the discussion, I would looking for a motion. Kathleen.
For the region, I move that we hire Greg Martineau as the next superintendent of the public schools in Northborough and Southborough.
Second for the region.
Moved by Kathleen, seconded by Dan.
I motion for Northborough that we accept Greg Martineau as this next superintendent of schools in Northborough and Southborough.
Okay.
Second.
Union?
Union?
I'll motion for Union too.
Second for Union.
Second for Union by Joan, motion by Susan. Do I have a second for Northborough?
Second.
Second by Joan. Southborough?
I'll move for Southborough. So moved.
Second for Southborough.
Moved by Katura, seconded by Roger. Okay, so now we can start discussion.
So I thought he did terrific tonight, and, you know, I mean, frankly, he's had a 5-year audition, you know.
Exactly.
And, you know, we've watched him develop and learn how this complicated construction that we have here, with all the different districts and how they have to act and interact, and the challenges of helping to run it and manage it. You know, I thought he came out with a lot of great answers tonight. I thought he had some good ideas on, you know, slight changes and tweaks he'd make to the way things happen, and some of his ideas really kind of rang well with me. You know, kind of a more consistency in communication, for example, you know, the readiness to admit that, you know, we really kind of blew it with the bus thing this year in terms of how that all got implemented, and, you know, what the changes were all about. You know, I think he kind of hinted at some of his thoughts about maybe the BYOD program could be, you know, done, you know, in a better, stronger, more, you know, less controversial way. You know, and I think, you know, one of the things that's clear to me is you need to understand this district and the job before you come in and take it. And as we brought people in from outside, you know, and they've had to struggle with dealing with 3 committees, you know, some of them have had a hard time doing it. And, you know, he knows the job, he knows the requirements of the job, and seems very ready and willing to take them on. And clearly, in my mind, after watching him for 5 years and hearing him tonight, is more than capable of doing it. I would strongly support his candidacy.
Thank you. I echo what Mr. Budka is saying. I tell you, I was significantly impressed with his presentation. I find him a man of high character and also high achievement. You know, looking through his resume was impressive. For anyone who hasn't had the opportunity, oh my word, you know, so at college, you know, his undergrad as well as his master's program, it's hard to find anything but an A. And that is, so he's been, he's been a teacher, he's been a principal, he's been an assistant superintendent. So to me, those are the best kind of leaders, ones that have, leaders that have a wide variety of experiences. Just listening to his presentation, the number of times that he had the opportunity to say, I or me, and instead he consistently chose us or we. That tells me something about the person, that he's very collaborative, that he, he's respectful, and that came out not only in his presentation, but also in the letters of recommendation that we've received. Time and again, it references to him being an outstanding leader, earning the respect of others, building a strong culture, leading by example. Again, another person said the exact same thing, uses we instead of I all the time. Again, those are the type of things that I'm was very happy to see. So, and then just when he went off script and talked about him as a person, I think that's really helpful to learn a little bit about who he is as a person. Someone who gets up at 4 a.m. every day, and he is a guy who is who's committed to giving everything. We all have one shot at this life, and he's surely making the most of his. So it's one thing how he answered our questions, but I loved to hear how parents and teachers express their questions to him and then their opinions about him. I have great respect for Mr. Mel Lawton as well as Keith Lavoie, and to hear from them how they see him as a leader, and the fact that we have the exceptional leader right in front of us, and I look forward to supporting his ascension to the superintendency tonight.
Kelly?
I agree. I think he looks a great candidate. Where I differ of opinion is that I feel that this process has just been really speedy. I'm new to this, so maybe this is a typical process and this is how it, goes rapid fire. But I just think that it's been very quick. I feel that, from the MASC, a lot from the community was saying that, they wanted due diligence, they wanted external searches. Could we find a better candidate? Maybe not. Possibly we could. I don't know. But just the idea that we're not exploring that option is where I struggle with this process. He presented great tonight, and I don't think anybody here would differ for that opinion. But it's just the timing and the rushness of it. If I could propose something, my idea would be more of like, if everybody's on board with wanting to go through with it, can we hire him as an interim superintendent, give it 1 year type thing? He himself said he has no experience as being a superintendent. Those were words out of his mouth. So what if he isn't in love with the job after doing it fully? What if we did it as like a year type thing, up to a year, giving him the experience to see if he is truly wants it, and us to make sure that this is the right person and he can handle the job. So that's my point.
I don't share those reservations. I think, it's pretty clear he has the experience. The process does not seem rushed to me at all. And I think the risk in doing that is, maybe we find someone who's got a resume that's similar to Greg's. I doubt we're going to find one that's any better that's out there. And probably it's going to be someone who's not a superintendent currently. There's very few, from what I understand from the MASC folks, very few superintendents moving from one job to another. So we're likely to get an assistant or something similar who's making a step up. And to me, to Paul's point, that would be a big risk, because in Greg, we have a known quantity. We've been working with him for 5 years, and I have pretty good confidence that he's going to be able to handle this job. As to, if for some reason he can't, there's always an out clause in a contract. If he wants out of this contract, he can get out. So I wouldn't, I think making him an interim would be almost an insult, and I would not support that at all.
Yeah, I would agree with Paul. I think that we need to be careful about the message that we send Greg if we if we kind of put it all on hold or, you know, began some sort of an external search. Is, you know, the horrific end result of something like that would be he leaves because he's an attractive candidate in other opportunities, and we know he's in fact interviewed for other superintendent positions, and, you know, if all of a sudden he's gone and the new person we bring in, whoever it is, all of a sudden misunderstood how complex the district was, and after a year at it, as we've had with other central office people, have said, oh, this is way too hard, way too complicated, way too much work for me, I'm going somewhere else. And all of a sudden we have the two top positions both vacant, or, you know, or maybe one filled by someone who's never worked in the district before, and the other one vacant because Greg has taken our message to heart and taken his resume and gone down the street. And I really, you know, I don't want the negative to be the reason why we hire the guy, but the negative is something that I think we can't afford to overlook. You know, that's all kind of well, we should hire him because these bad things will happen. I mean, frankly, I think we should hire him because it sounds to me like a lot of good things will happen. But there's the flip side of that coin is one that, you know, I think we need to prudently be at least concerned about and recognize in our own head. I mean, this guy has looked for other superintendent positions. We know that. He's told us. We've seen it publicly, you know, written up. He's, you know, they like him in every town, not some of, every town he's worked in, they like him, and, you know, they've brought him back. I mean, it's one of the things that caused us to hire him back the last time around. I made a point of saying, wait a second, you know, he worked for Hopkinton, he left, he went to Leicester, you know, Hopkinton took him back. You know, that's a wonderful, that's a better reference than anything else you could possibly get. You know, I mean, they'll talk to him again, other towns will talk to him. He's I don't know, in my mind, I'd be nervous about the message that we send if we postpone this in any way. And I don't think we're gonna necessarily find anyone better.
I just want to say, I agree with Paul and Dan and their sentiments. I think Greg has a proven track record with our district, working with us, and his knowledge and complexity of our district is valuable. And I think that we should look for a goal of looking for a long-term candidate, and he's got their trajectory, and he wants to be in this type of district, and I feel that he would want to be here long-term. I also agree that an interim position would be an insult. I do agree. I think we should be thinking longer term, especially with developing our strategic plan and moving forward. If he's going to be in at the groundwork of that time frame, we want to definitely plan long term. And I just think that, again, those are my sentences. He's just proven. We know him, and he's just. I think he interviewed very well tonight.
Kathleen?
So I understand Kelly's reservation, and I understand also it was also brought up, I think, in some of the focus groups, is that, and it's mostly by parents who, and probably, I don't know, they work in, you know, private sector, and external searches always sound like a good idea because you want to cast a wide net and you want to see what is out there and the best that you can get. But I think, especially from a parent's perspective, having been one, there is no way to understand the complexity, the true complexity of the district, unless you have actually been on a K-8 school committee and on the regional school committee. Because when you're on either one of those, you don't get exposed to the complexity of the other. So it is because of that internal candidates have always been more successful here. They always have, because they know what they're getting into. And external candidates, as Paul mentioned, they come, they see, they go, whoa, you know, 3 school committees, 3 school committee meetings, 3 budgets, 3 everything, when I can go down the street and only have to deal with one. So to assuage the concerns about that is that Greg is a phenomenal candidate, and he knows what he's getting into. He knows the complexity of this district. He has been in every single situation that you could be in this district, and he always comes through with flying colors. So, I just think it's an absolute no-brainer. To let this candidate go would be devastating for this school district and for both towns.
I thought it was also persuasive what the MASC representative said last night about how if we were to do some sort of additional search, what would we really be looking for? We would really be looking for someone who's a good fit. And fit is knowing the district, understanding what they're getting into, as well as culturally understanding what they're getting into. And from what I understand and the references, the people who spoke in Greg's favor, and from what I understand, he also has the support of other principals and lots of other people in the district who have had really positive experiences working with him, and would be very happy for him to be in the position. And I think that just speaks volumes to what he can bring. Jack?
I am also of the opinion, similar to Kelly, that much like what our constituents have advocated for in the survey questions, that we look at external candidates. If we look at what happened when Charles was an internal candidate, Charles Gabron, he was vetted. The committees at the time decided to go out, and they actually did hire an outside person. Now, tragically, that person died within the first year for tenure, and Charles was still here, and we were lucky enough to be able to hire him, and he did a great job as superintendent. So we have that kind of past practice. Greg wanted the opportunity to compete for the position. I would just like to see us get the best candidate, not necessarily Mr. Wright or Mrs. Wright, but whoever's going to be the best long-term fit. Just, again, my opinion.
I'll just add that I think if we did that, I mean, it's one thing if there were some alarm bells that went off, and I haven't seen any, actually. I haven't seen any in his entire tenure with us as the assistant superintendent. So many of us that have been on these committees have worked with him for his entire career here so far, and there haven't been any of those alarm bells that I've seen. And had there been, then yeah, maybe if I and the majority of us felt like, well, he's really good, but I'm really concerned about X, Y, and Z. I haven't seen any of that. So there's no evidence to suggest to me that, we don't already have an exceptional candidate right in front of us. One of the letters of recommendation also said Greg's leadership talents far exceed his current position. I think all that also carries weight, and I think if we offered him anything other than a standard contract, I think that would be a vote of marginal confidence in him, and not the way to start out in any relationship.
I mean, I see people's desire to have looking at an external candidate, but I do not know, at least in my work experience, of any situation where a company I've worked for has had an outstanding internal candidate that ever went through the expense of doing an outside search. And it's not done, is my experience. You don't let talented people walk out the door. And everything I heard tonight from Greg, it was actually better than I could ever imagined, his answers to these questions, because I was, going through the questions, kind of seeing, kind of in your mind, as you're developing it, how someone might answer it. And, every single one of them, I have to say, he answered it better than I ever would have expected in terms of opening it up. So it's not even the bad side, that Paul brought up. To me, it's letting someone good walk out the door. So, and I'm not in favor of external searches for the sake of external searches. When you have something, as Dan said, like if there was alarm bells that went off, or even, reservations about the individual. Every comment I read about having an external search, in the surveys, none of them mentioned any reservation about Greg, about him, his ability to do the job, as far as I read. Where, and that's usually, a sign that I would look for if someone was saying we should do an external search because, I'm concerned about this aspect. And I didn't hear that. Lauren?
So I think something that really speaks volumes is that the teachers and administrators who are here in support of Greg, what they said really speaks volumes. And as a teacher myself, listening to them, I got the sense that they feel supported, they feel heard, and that's very valuable to a teacher. Greg showed that he has the ability to take himself out of the assistant superintendent role and put himself in the shoes of a principal, and put himself in the shoes of a teacher, and also put himself in the shoes of the student. And for him to be able to do that shows that he's really thinking big picture. He mentioned that he wants to sort of eliminate these silos that happen within schools or within departments, that when he implements programs and strategies, that they are supported, that there is a long-range plan and that there's follow-up, and he asks teachers for their suggestions and their reflections, and that he's supportive of using teachers to teach teachers, because teachers are a valuable resource as well. Something else is allowing students opportunity to learn differently and through different channels is really important, especially in a diverse community, and we're becoming more diverse and with more diverse needs. Additionally, listening. He mentioned the word listen a couple of times, and that's really important. As a teacher, if you don't feel listened to, it affects your performance in the classroom. You become bitter if you don't feel like you're being listened to. And just the fact that he is willing to listen and he has shown that he has listened, I think is a testament to the type of person he is. So again, teachers being heard and seen and that they feel that will really just revolutionize the classroom. And again, he spoke to multiple times. It's about the students. He kept going back to it's all about the students. And then finally, he sees value in taking time to celebrate what's happening in the classroom. I think probably the teachers in the audience and maybe even the parents and us as well know that we sort of harp on the negatives all the time. Oh, we could have done better. Oh, our MCAS scores need to be better. Oh, they didn't perform well on that assessment. And they really put themselves down. But taking time to celebrate, there's a lot of learning taking place, and he realizes that, and he wants to celebrate that. So as a teacher, I felt that he was really valuing the opinions of teachers and that students come first. And as long as you support the teachers and the principals, then the students will also be supported. So because of that, I do support Greg Martineau as next superintendent.
A couple of years ago, I went to the central office to meet with Christine and Greg with an aspiration to come to school committee about the efforts that we make in the community with the Jazz Festival and things. And I did very much experience that listening, very much being heard. And as he talked about the ability to create healthy working relationships across the district, I could really see those elements that he brought to that meeting. And he started tonight by saying that one of his great strengths is maximizing the people around him. And I think that comes through good listening. It's heavy work to give all of that space and all of that listening. But I think in the end, the buy-in he would get from that effort and is willing to do the work would be a great advantage to the district.
Roger.
So I won't repeat what others have said, at least I'll try not to, although I would say this, the trial idea, and I think one of the things that results from telling somebody you'll give them a year is, if they're smart, they're only going to give you that same year, right? So you send a message that it's something that we want to try out. Well, I would expect that the person that we're trying out would also be doing the same thing to us. And I don't think that's a relationship that we want to have. You know, we either, I think, make this decision as a long-term decision or make a different decision. I'm a big supporter of Greg. I want to talk about the listening in a little different fashion. I think that one of the things I really like, having worked with Greg a bit and also having listened to him, is his management style. I think you heard, and other people have experienced it, is really a team-building, consensus-building style. And you can't be effective at that without being willing to listen. So I think that's it, at least for me, that's a big plus. The last thing I'll say is it's related to the complexity of the district. And, you know, that it keeps coming up, and you cannot underestimate. I haven't been in the region, you know, but even just being, you know, on one board, you still cannot underestimate how complex this district is. And there are very few possible candidates, if any, you know, that would really understand what it's like to live this. I asked Greg, I stopped by the office sometime in the last couple of weeks, and I said, I'm curious, I said, how would you describe the possibility of being superintendent in a complex district like this? And he said, you know, you really can't look at it as just a job. It's really a way of life. You know, when you're dealing with this kind of complexity, and I've kept thinking about that. So, you know, I'm a big supporter of moving forward with Greg, you know, as the superintendent.
Yeah, I'd like to say that as much as we're saying Greg is also, you know, he's a great listener, is that I think that we as school committee members have to be good listeners to each other, okay, and respect each other's opinions. Respecting hearing from all of you, and along with Kelly. Kelly is the newest member, okay? And many times, at this point, I'm glad that I had tenure on here, because I could really understand this process, been through it, you know, and it's daunting when you're here and you're only been elected for the both of you, and Kathleen yourself, and you're at this task where we're now selecting the next leader. Sometimes when you have teachers that you're going to select, you do it over, you know, 2 interviews, looking at the resumes, doing a model lesson and everything like that. And here tonight we're making the decision for all our districts. So I'm so glad that I have more tenure than you tonight, you know, because I have the history behind it. But I think as educators, we have to listen to everybody's idea, because you never know who's going to come up with a good idea. We did have an interim superintendent once, and it did work. And that was because we did have somebody in the district and wanted to see if it was going to work out. So I applaud Kelly for thinking of that and thinking out of the box, okay? And maybe sometimes the idea works and sometimes it doesn't. Getting off that, I think that as a school committee member, personally, I did think it was rushed. But if that's what had to be done, you're the chairs, that's, you know, and I applaud you for what you did. You did a great job in doing it. But I could see for a new member, this was probably a little bit rushed. And I think the complexity of this is that we have to do it in open session. You know, I think that if we could have gone behind closed doors, we could have, you know, listened to everybody's opinion, because you're worrying about what you're saying. You got the audience, you got the TV, and we do have to do this in open session. There's nothing about it. We have to do it. So maybe we can take a lesson from here. Lynn, you and I said that we were going to do the booklet for new committee members.
I was just thinking about that last night.
I know, so, right thought, no wonder we're both on it together. So I'm thinking that's a separate issue, so maybe we have to just look at this and just see where's the history and what happens. I really wanted to be the last one to do it because I've had a different advantage than the rest of you, because I worked under Greg for 5 years in Hopkinton. And he came in and he had to fill the shoes of a principal that we all loved. And we're like, okay, who's this now? Okay, who's walking in the door? And 5 years of working with Greg is what you saw tonight. I thought it was gone for a while. I really did. But my husband reminded me that an assistant superintendent is like a vice president. And at that time, and I'm thinking like, especially for the president that just passed away, which was President Bush, is that when he was under, Reagan, he didn't really get to shine. He was the one who said he would always do the funerals and he'd do all that, and he'd just carry the bags and away he went, and he always knew he was going to be on a plane to a funeral. When I was a teacher under Greg is what I saw that was right here. He allowed each of us to be a leader. He was not the one who was dictating, this is what has to be done. He did allow each of us to rise like cream does in an old-fashioned milk bottle. And he had so many innovative ideas, but you came across thinking that they were yours. And he was a great listener, that, like you said, he was a great listener. He listened to us. And he had this educational vision and came in with things that you wanted to work harder because of what he was doing. And he had a set time, just like he said. He had a meeting, we were done. We didn't go over an hour, we didn't go over 15 minutes. Faculty meetings were right on to the dot, and he was out of there. And what I applauded about him, some of us would be there to 7 o'clock at night. Greg was gone every day at 5. And I thought that was great because he had a balance in his life. He got his job done. He was out of there at 5. If you want to stay, fine. But also, he knew where the balance was. He had another life, and he had to do it. I don't know how, with everything that goes on here, how he would get that done, but I'm hoping that he can, if he did have it. What was refreshing for me was that I saw the old Greg. I saw the Greg that I worked for. I saw the old Greg that I worked for 5 years. And I'm like, wow, okay? And I think it is the position. And I think that you, all of us, have seen the wonderful things that he has done. But the character of Greg really came out. I mean, we did ask him that tough question. What was some of the things that you would keep that were the same, and some of the ones that you would not keep? And I'm sure that he was very polite. Maybe there's other ones that he wouldn't say. But I kept saying to Greg when I was under his leadership, is that I knew I would go in and talk to him, and I'd say to him, no, someday you're going to be a superintendent. Someday you're going to be a superintendent. And when the position came in for assistant superintendent, I and another colleague went in and told him about this one. And I kept saying, but even when he had this one, you're too good. You're going to go on. I just know that the way he is. And like I said, what I saw tonight was the old Mr. Martineau that I knew as my principal, and led me to be a better educator and a leader. So that's my personal feelings, and that's my recollection of working with him in Hopkinton for 5 years.
So sorry, Joan, I know you wanted to go last.
I can still
She'll have a follow-up.
So I'm not going to repeat. I really enjoyed listening to him tonight, because I feel like when we're at meetings, we're listening to Christine so much that he doesn't really get a chance to star. And I thought he was a great star tonight. Like, I really enjoyed listening to his answers to the questions. And he was very consistent. His voice did not change a bit. I mean, every question he was thoughtful about, and his voice was thoughtful with it. And I love the last 3 questions he left us with. And I love the fact that he has a life outside of his job, because I think in life, you need that. You have to have that balance to be a better leader and a better person. And I think that that's, like, I'd love to go see his garden, you know? But I think that that is good. I think that, running gets rid of your stress, or gardening, whatever it is. I think it's good to step back, and for him to be able to do that, his employees can do that too, not feeling bad. And I think that in order to run a successful business, and the school is that, your employees need to see you doing that so they can do that as well.
So,
So.
that's it.
Did you want to say the last word?
You going to move the question, Joe?
I'm just sitting back. I said it all, probably too much.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's comments and everyone's ideas is valued. I just don't want anyone to think that your input is not and not respected. So, having said that, and no further discussion, this is one of the complexities of this district. The superintendent is hired and appointed by the Union School Committee, which is made up of 3 members from the Northborough School Committee and 3 members from the Southborough School Committee, who those school committees elect. In addition, the decision is made by the Regional School Committee. Those 2 bodies will vote on this, and it has to have a majority of both bodies separate. After that, as we discussed last night, we'll give the opportunity for the full K-8 school committees from Northborough and Southborough, but the hiring decision is made by the union and the regional school committees. So, again, complexity. So why don't we go with the region to vote on the motion of offering the position of superintendent of schools of Northborough and Southborough Regional, Northborough and Southborough School District to Gregory Martineau. All those in favor on the region? Opposed? Okay, so one opposed and 8 and 9 people, right? 8. 8 in favor, 1 opposed. Now, the Union School Committee, Paul, you will call for that vote.
Union School Committee, all in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous.
Unanimous. So, and now we'll give the opportunity for the Northborough and Southborough. Northborough?
We can't change our vote. It doesn't count, right?
Opposed? That's 3 in favor, 1 opposed. Southborough?
Well, the 2 non-union members aren't here, so it's not going to be. We can't change our vote, right? Anyway, all in favor?
All in favor,
It's
okay.
unanimous.
Unanimous. Okay, so we will go forth, and I guess, Paul, you and I will contact Assistant Superintendent Martineau, and I think we work on, assuming he says yes, we would work on contract with then. Maybe? Yes, Jen?
Just a word of advice. I think that because of the contract is that I would think that you 2 are going to be working on it, but I think it would be helpful if, I think we all may have a copy of it, if we could give some suggestions, because a lot of it hasn't been changed through years.
Okay.
Because unfortunately, my name's on both of the last ones, in the way that the chairpersonship has gone. And there are things that have been changed, to fit, like going for a doctorate degree and something like that, and maybe that would have to be changed with Greg. But I think that now that we have new members aboard, is maybe, if you feel confident, it's just a suggestion, is to pass it out to members and just see if members have things that they think should be updated into it, or, onto the contract and give it back to the both of you. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know if, everyone has a contract because we passed them out after the last evaluation, I think last year. So it's up to you and how you want to do it.
Is it like the same contract for every superintendent, or is
It
it
has been,
uniquely?
changes have been made to it.
Yeah, so isn't it like uniquely negotiated with each superintendent, or, I mean, I know there's probably standard.
There's standard things that are
terms,
in it,
but-
and some of the things have been eliminated. You know, as you go through the years, there are things that just, Kathleen, you probably know about that too, things that just are not pertinent that were on it before. But I don't know how the current one is about, you know, with the doctorate, and, I mean, some of the vacation time has been changed according to, you know, the person who's in that position, how they wanted that or not. So I think we have to look at that, and some of it was even, you know, some of the money into like annuity or something like that. So we may want to just, but I mean, I think it would be beneficial to all the members to have a copy of it. And Kathleen?
Well, they should have copies, right? Because didn't we send them out after the last evaluation process?
Right.
Because it was pertinent to the contract negotiation, to the raise. I seem to recall that when Christine took over as superintendent, so I think she and, was it you and Sue? Like sat down and sort of blank slate. I'm not sure that, you know, we just take Christine's old contract and retrofit it to Greg. So I think the first step would be for you guys to sit down and talk to Greg and see, you know, how he wants to structure it, and then share that with us. And we have Christine's old one to compare it to.
Right, that makes sense.
This
Paul,
is-
you had your
No, I was
same
gonna pretty much go
similar
on the same
thing?
path. I mean, you know, they're all, we built different unique things in for each, you know, each superintendent as the contract came up. And,
Yeah.
you know, we should, I mean, my take is you guys should take a look at Christine's, the standard language about vacations and, you know, termination clauses and that sort of stuff, migrate it over, but then the rest of it is, you know, something that needs to be
unique.
negotiated.
And then something that I think we mentioned last night, Kathleen, were you talking about how in the contract is the policy for who votes on appointing the superintendent?
No, what it actually is who interacts with the superintendent.
Okay.
So, can't say it verbatim, but basically it says that with 20 school committee members, we cannot expect one superintendent to be able to interface with 20 members. So, to protect the superintendent's time, the contract actually stipulates that the union chair and the regional chair are really the only ones who should be contacting the superintendent. Now, that's a practice based on who the superintendent is, and some superintendents have said, I absolutely must adhere to that, you know, because I'm just getting overrun, and some superintendents have said no. So, but that is actually what's in the contract.
Okay. And then, so how would we go about, if we wanted to, changing the policy to allow more members to vote, so non-union members?
That is in the
That's
regional,
different.
that's in the regional.
That's in the regional agreement that
Agreement.
created
Okay.
the district itself, and
Not-
the
not-
towns vote on it.
No, it's Mass General law.
It's very different than.
It's a state thing.
Okay.
Okay, so that's kind of a little bit, we can always raise that at a future meeting. It's not on the agenda, so, but, so we'll, Paul and I will get together and talk about the contract and go forward. So I will entertain motions to adjourn.
So moved for the region?
So moved for the region, moved by Dan for the region, and seconded by Paul.
So moved for Northborough.
Moved by Lauren from Northborough.
Second for Northborough.
Second for Northborough.
I'll move for Southborough.
Second for Southborough?
Moved by Katura for Southborough, seconded by Roger, and.
Union, I'll move.
Moved by Joan for Union, and seconded by, for Union.
I'll second.
Seconded by Katura. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.